So what was once supposed to be the matchup of the year in the SEC then turned into a mismatch leading into the game, and not even the best matchup of the day until we got to kickoff. And then it turned out to be the game of the year, at least thus far, in the SEC. Texas A&M defeats Alabama surprisingly 41-38. We got Gary Harris on the line, new sports director there at WVUA in Tuscaloosa. Gary, how are we doing tonight?
Doing great, Mark. Always a pleasure to be with you, buddy, even though I'm not used to being with you under these circumstances because Alabama loses so rarely. I don't think you've ever had me on coming off a loss, so this is uncharted territory.
Well, the first one since the Iron Bowl of 2019.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it's a rough ride for the Alabama fans there to have to suffer through a loss. But as I kind of talked through it at the open, it's just amazing what we perceive these matchups and games to be during the off season, and in such a long off season, we talk, and then we finally get to the game, and it sets up much differently. And in this matchup, it eventually did turn out to be possibly the game we expected, but nobody was anticipating that because of the way the Aggies had been playing.
Yeah, we got the game that back in the summer that we expected. We just didn't get the circumstances leading up to the game that we expected. Exactly what you said. I mean, nobody thought A&M would have 2 losses. In fact, when CBS booked that game for prime time, used their prime time exception, you know what they were counting on? They were counting on undefeated A&M, undefeated Alabama in a top 10 matchup. Well, Alabama held up its end of the bargain, undefeated and ranked number 1, but Texas A&M lost to Arkansas in Arlington, and then inexplicably lost at home to Mississippi State. Not that Mississippi State's not a good team, but I don't think we saw that one coming. So then all of a sudden, Alabama coming off a game against Ole Miss when a lot of people thought they might have trouble. They might not be able to slow down Ole Miss, might even get beat. Well, they absolutely destroyed the Rebels. So what are you thinking? Well, common sense dictates that Texas A&M is struggling. Zach Calzada, the former backup quarterback, I mean, you know, he was just awful. Let's be honest, just awful. And you come into this game, Alabama an 18-point favorite, and thinking, if the A&M can just get it into the second half for television purposes and keep it competitive, it'll be good. And next thing you know, A&M, dominates the first half. Alabama, as you would expect from the number 1 ranked team riding a 19-game winning streak and not having lost an unranked team since 2007, came back, Mark, as we saw, and actually 5 minutes to go takes a 7-point lead. A&M's offense had done nothing in the second half. I mean, nothing. Hadn't even hardly been on the field. Their one touchdown came on that nearly 100-yard kickoff return. But then they get the ball back with 5 minutes to go at the 35-yard line, march right down the field, score a touchdown, kick it back to Alabama. Alabama, which had been moving the ball almost nonstop in the second half, goes 3 and out, has to punt the ball. And A&M gets in position, and Small hits the field goal. Even though he hooked it off his foot, somehow it knuckleballed back through, and you got 41-38, and a shocking upset. 18-point underdog A&M gets their season back on track. The biggest win that they've had since the last time they beat Alabama with Johnny Manziel in 2012, and Jimbo Fisher becomes the first former Saban assistant to beat Nick Saban. And like I said, all kinds of streaks broken. 19-game winning streak, first Saban assistant to win a game, 100-game winning streak against non-ranked opponents, although I think A&M is certainly good enough to be a ranked opponent and will be before the season's over. So that's why it's college football. You think you know, but you don't know. Alabama at Florida almost got beat, and then everybody expected a doozy against Ole Miss. Then they look so good. They roll into A&M, and they lose. But you know what? Mistakes, Mark. I mean, too many drop balls, too many bust on defense, not able to get pressure on Calzada. He got comfortable. He kind of settled in, and he had a kind of a Steven Garcia moment. The guy throws for 285 yards and 3 touchdowns. And like we said, I'm not trying to be dramatic here, but he'd been awful. I mean, he'd been terrible. And he has his best game of his career against Alabama. So that's usually what happens when Alabama loses. The other team plays great. Alabama doesn't play its best. And you have a last kick, last play of the game field goal. And there you go. Alabama goes down.
Hey, folks, please like the video. Share these videos out on social media, because if you enjoy the content, others will as well. And subscribe right here, the Voice of College Football. We always enjoy the conversation and the insight from Gary Harris, WVUA sports director there in Tuscaloosa. So, as you mentioned, had this game come off the heels of the performance at the Swamp, then it would have been understandable. But They blow off the Rebels' doors there in the first half, 28-0. Regardless, you mentioned the mistakes. Is this team not as dominant along the line of scrimmage Is that really at the heart of this? Is that where it starts?
I think that's part of it, Mark, and I do think that's where it starts. They're not dominant up front on either defense or offense. Plus, too, let's be honest, Alabama isn't judged like other teams. If any other team in the country had a season like Alabama had last year and lost what Alabama lost from that team, you'd be saying, well, it's going to be a rebuilding year. And in Alabama, you're just expected to reload. Mark, they lost a lot from that team. You're talking about 6 first-round draft picks. Let that sink in for a minute. Not 6 draft picks, 6 first-round draft picks. The Heisman Trophy winner, Mac Jones, who was the most accurate quarterback in the country. You know, they had a season similar to what LSU had in 2019. Alabama went 13-0, went 10-0 against the SEC, plus had to beat Florida in the SEC championship game, plus had to beat Notre Dame and Ohio State in the playoff. And, you know, we saw what happened to LSU last year, and we saw what happened this year to LSU. So often when a team wins a national championship, so much goes into winning that championship and everything aligns that oftentimes they take a step back. I think that's what's happening here. I think Alabama's still a really good team, Mark, and it would not surprise me if they do run the table here and get to 11-1 and get to Atlanta with an opportunity to play the SEC East division champion for the SEC title, probably Georgia. So they're good enough to do that, but they're also not good enough that they can just show up. If they play like they did against A&M, they'll lose another game or 2, possibly as soon as this Saturday night, because I got to tell you, what I think happened here was after the Florida game, there were a lot of questions about this team, as you said, particularly on the lines of scrimmage. The Florida offensive line pushed the Bama defensive line around. At times, the offensive line was not able to get movement against the Florida defensive line. So then you're expecting the Ole Miss game to go down to the wire and to be a shootout, and Alabama looked so good. They prepared that week. They knew what was being said about them. They were dialed in and focused, and like Nick Saban says, you have to respect winning. Well, I think they got past Ole Miss in the fashion that they did, and this is just my feeling. I think last week they didn't prepare well. I think they felt like, well, we got past Ole Miss. We've showed everybody what we're all about. This A&M team's not very good. They've lost back-to-back games. We're going to roll in there, and I don't think they focused, and I don't think they had the kind of preparation. Like Nick Saban says, Mark, you've heard him say it, when you get to the game, everybody wants to win. Everybody wants to play well. You know, everybody's fired up and ready to go. What do you do during the week, though, to put yourself in position to play well on Saturday? That's when the game, like Saban said, once you get to the game, you know, you just go play. If you don't put the work in during the week, it shows up on Saturday. I think that's what happened to Alabama. So for their sake, they better have a good week of preparation this week, because you and I both know that Mississippi State team's coming off a bye week, sitting over in Starkville saying, you know what, we beat A&M at Kyle Field. We beat the team that beat Alabama. We can beat Alabama. So I think it could be another tough game Saturday night. And this Alabama team is really good. And I think they're good enough to beat everybody left on their schedule, but not if they don't play their best. We saw that. If they don't play well, they can be beaten. This is not last year's team. That team last year, Mark, I got to tell you, I never felt like they were going to lose a game, ever. And this team this year, I think it's possible they could lose another 1 or 2 games if they don't get it together.
Gary, when you look at the wide receivers and running back play, again, we're comparing this to Alabama standards. You know, these guys could go anywhere in the country, start, play well, the whole deal. But the guys that they're replacing are just special. And sometimes you don't get the best blocking. Sometimes you don't get the best throw where it needs to be, but the catch is still made by a brilliant player who high points the football, outfights a defender, spins, and, you know, just you don't get the perfect blocking, but Najee Harris makes something out of nothing. Again, we're talking about 4- and 5-star tremendous players right now, but replacing special players.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Mark. That's a great point. And John Mechie, for instance, John Mechie's a really good receiver. You know that. You saw it last year. But did John Mechie benefit 2 years ago from having Ruggs and Judy and Waddle and Smith? Did he benefit last year from having Smith and Waddle for part of the year? Sure he did. You know, he got a lot of single coverage. You know, everything was slanted toward Devontae Smith and, of course, Jalen Waddle when he was still playing. Now, all of a sudden, teams see John Mechie as wide receiver 1. He's really good. I don't think he's the caliber of those players that you mentioned. And now when people are showing extra attention to him, he's struggling a little bit. Now, Jamison Williams has helped out a ton coming over from Ohio State. His speed is world class. And he, in my opinion, has been the best receiver on the team this year. But even he has had some drop balls. Mechie's had some drop balls. Slade Bolden has dropped balls. Billingsley's dropped balls. Cameron Latou dropped what would have been a touchdown against Texas A&M. Would have probably been the difference in the game. And Brian Robinson's having a really good year. In fact, I thought the other night they didn't use him enough. He's running hard, but he's not Najee. Najee out of the backfield was like another receiver, Mark, and he's showing that in the NFL. His pass catching skills are receiver quality. I mean, those players are first-round draft picks and even elite as rookies in the NFL. These players are good, but I don't think they are what those players were. And I think Bryce Young is really talented. And it wouldn't shock me if before he leaves that he's up there with Tua and Mac Jones. But right now, the Mac Jones of last year is better than the Bryce Young of right now. So Alabama's not the same team, and particularly on offense. Defensively, I'm scratching my head a little bit because I quite frankly think they should be better than they are. Now, against Ole Miss, they were fabulous. So they showed what their potential is to hold, as you said, the Rebels to 0 points and 118 yards of offense in the first half. Come on, nobody's going to do that. But for whatever reason, outside of that one game, they have not been a dominant defense. They've missed too many tackles. They haven't got enough pressure on the quarterback. They've had breakdowns in the back end. So this Alabama team, I still think, can get to the college football playoff. But I also think the margin for error is gone. And I could see this team losing another game or two if they don't improve.
It's going to be interesting coming up this Saturday, of course, against Mississippi State. Mike Leach joins the conference, and we were all curious to see how that would work out. And to his credit, he adjusted when the passing game didn't work last year. They became a running team and defensive-minded team that finished with a flurry, won a bowl game, and then they turned around this year, and he's got the quarterback in play, and he's developed him to a point, 14 touchdowns and 2 picks. He's a really good player, and they're going to throw the ball. He's pushed 70 pass attempts the last 3 weeks. They're going to throw it a ton. Alabama's going to have to tackle in space.
The air raid is back, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you said it. Will Rogers, he ran this offense in high school, but it's not the same as what, they're running at Mississippi State. It's the same concept, but running at this level, it's taken an adjustment. But they're back. You're right. I mean, they're throwing it more than anybody in the league. As you said, 1,862 yards, 14 touchdowns, 2 picks for Will Rogers. He's playing great. And the main thing that they're doing, you watch this against the A&M. Last year when they played Arkansas and Barry Odom, put that 3-2-6 scheme in and just gave them fits. And that's what everybody started doing last year. I mean, they started playing zone, and Mississippi State was still trying to take it down the field, and they were turning the ball over. It was just ugly, like you said. So they wound up becoming more of a running team. This year, Rodgers has got the experience, and you know what they'll do? If you drop back in that zone, he's patient. He'll throw it underneath. They'll pick you apart 7, 8, 10, 12 yards at a time. And then when you come out of that zone, you man up on the outside, then they'll go over the top against you. We saw that against Texas A&M. So they're a very scary offensive team right now. I mean, this is what Mississippi State fans thought they were signing up for when they got Mike Leach. They saw that first game last year against LSU and said, wow, 600 yards, this is going to be every week, and it wasn't. COVID, just a lot of different reasons they never really got on track. This year, I know they've got 2 losses, but they've gotten untracked on offense, and let's be honest, that Memphis game, come on, man, officiating killed them. And against LSU, they had a chance to win that game. So I think they're going to be confident. And if Alabama, and you say, well, you got to get pressure on Will Rogers, but you know how hard that is to do. Mark, he gets the ball out of his hands. That's what I'm saying. They're operating at a high frequency. So like you said, you better tackle in space. They're going to complete passes. When they catch it, you got to tackle them. You've got to make them go down the field and play after play after play, get them into third downs, and hope you can get some third down stops. You can't allow them to hit 3 or 4 pops on you and then in the red zone and they score. Even if Alabama's able to answer, I don't think Alabama wants a shootout in this game. Now, defensively, I also like what I see from Mississippi State up front. They're physical, they're fast, they're not deep. Okay, they don't have a lot of depth, but they're running to the football. They're tackling people. I'm high on this Mississippi State team, and I think this is, you look up again, and here's Alabama because the odds makers are trying to set this line so they can get an equal amount of play, and it's 17, 18 points again. I think Alabama's going to win the game. If they cover that spread, I'll be surprised.
Mississippi State with a couple nice wins against NC State, and of course, they were the team that went to Kyle Field and came out with a win. One last thing here, Gary. I lived around this rivalry and covered it for about 7 years. And when I say a rivalry, I'm not talking about statistically. Nobody outside the SEC or outside of that area would you know, if naming the top 5 to 10 rivalries in the conference would come up with this. It's merely a geographical rivalry. It's 83-18 all time. You know better than I do what the dominance has been, but it is also the two closest campuses. I think I'm accurate on this. Yes, in the SEC,
Absolutely.
right down
Yep.
Route 82
Mm-hmm.
from campus to campus. So there's a unique flavor there. And of course, when Mississippi State, they've got some historic wins. They're few and far between, but going back to 1980, of course, MSU fans love to talk that one up. I was around for 1996. Actually, my son was born the night that Mississippi State upset a top 5 to 10 Alabama team in Starkville. There occasionally are some good ones. And of course, Calvin Ridley came to the rescue a couple of years ago in Starkville.
Yeah, you know, it is a rivalry, and you're exactly right. If you ask people around the country, they'd say, "Oh, Alabama, Mississippi State's not right," but it is. It's the two closest geographical schools in the Southeastern Conference. Alabama recruits a lot in Mississippi. Mississippi State tries to come across and recruit in Alabama. And Alabama has dominated this series. There's no other way around it. But you're right. When Mississippi State has won, they've been big wins. The 1980 game, in fact, I'm doing a feature this weekend with some former Alabama players that played in that game. You know, Alabama was on a 28-game winning streak. They were back-to-back national champions going for third in a row, and similar to what A&M did last week. Mississippi State was a big underdog in that game in Jackson. They beat Alabama 6-3. And you mentioned 96 with Jackie Sherrill. You remember Sylvester Croom winning back-to-back games over Alabama, 2006 and 2007, Saban's first year. Now, 7 was the last time that they won. Dan Mullen never beat Nick Saban when he was at Mississippi State, so I think Alabama's won, 12 or 13 in a row. But there have been competitive games, and you mentioned just a few years ago with Jalen Hurts at quarterback, it takes a late touchdown for Alabama to win that game. And Mississippi State, when Dak was there, came in at Tuscaloosa ranked number 1, and that was a great football game. Alabama won it, but it was a great football game. And I think Mississippi State, as I said, they're going to be confident. One thing about Mike Leach, he respects Nick Saban, he respects Alabama, but he doesn't fear anybody. I mean, that's just not his personality. He's quirky, but he's also relaxed and laid back. And I think his players will feed off of that. He'll go into it and he'll say, "Listen, guys, if we play our football game, we can beat this team." So I'm expecting a really good game. I do think Alabama will win the football game, but I won't be surprised at all. And I'll be sitting over there at the press box at Scott Field at Davis Wade Stadium on Saturday night. If I look up, early in the fourth quarter and this is a 6, 8, 10-point game, I think it's going to be competitive.
Gary Harris, WVUA, there in Tuscaloosa. Gary, we know you got to prepare for your nightly sportscast. Love talking college football with you.
I love it too, Mark. Anytime. I appreciate being on your show. I enjoy it, and you do a great job.
Mississippi State may not win any championships this year, but the Bulldogs make it interesting just about every week. Check out the box scores if you've not checked out the action, and you should, and many of you will for the first time this Saturday when the Bulldogs welcome in former number 1 Alabama. We got Daniel Black on the line from MSU Bulldog Blitz to help us break down those Mississippi State Bulldogs. Daniel, how's it going?
Pretty good, Mark. How are you?
I am doing just fine. So let's see if you adhere to my logic here. Mississippi State beat Texas A&M. Texas A&M beat Alabama. Mississippi State should be able to beat Alabama. A plus B equals C. No problem.
Yeah, it's a transitive win. We might as well not even play on Saturday. I think that State now has a 4-2 record on to Vanderbilt.
I like it. Then you can play Vanderbilt. Just go ahead and play that game.
That's right. Exactly. I think State would want to play that game.
The Alabama game, we can put that one in the books right now.
That's right.
All
exactly.
Right. Well, Will Rogers, he doesn't seem to be scared of anyone. Went to Kyle Field. Pulled off another tremendous effort there. He's throwing close to 70 passes a game the last 3 or 4 games. So it's typical Mike Leach offense, and Will Rogers has been up to the challenge. I was interested in hearing Mike Leach's comments after the game at Kyle Field, because you could tell he was very proud of his team, very happy, but still wanted to keep things in check, let everyone know there's still work to be done, still improvement to be made.
Sure. I think that's an extremely accurate assessment. You mentioned Will Rogers. He is progressively getting better and better and better as the season's going on, and the results are showing that. I mean, you have losses to Memphis and LSU, games that State really should have won had it not been for mistakes in both games on State's part, like turnovers, and in the Memphis game, some poor officiating. But even with those mistakes, Will Rogers was performing extremely well. I mean, so far this season, he has a touchdown to interception ratio of 14-2. Again, last week, or I guess it was 2 weeks ago against Texas A&M, 78% completion percentage, which is the second best on the season for 408 total yards, and 3 touchdowns without any interceptions. He's getting progressively better. The biggest complaint about Will Rogers from Mississippi State fans throughout the season is, he holds on to the ball too much. He's too hesitant to throw the ball downfield. He relies on checkdowns too much. Well, those, quote unquote issues that we're seeing with Rogers are progressively declining. He is getting better and better. He's becoming more comfortable throwing the ball downfield. That was shown against Texas A&M. He's doing a much better job understanding and performing against a zone defense, which is something that Mississippi State really could not perform against a year ago. Any team that went to man, Mississippi State would pick them apart. Any team that went to zone, State would struggle. And while State still performs a lot better in man coverage than they do in zone coverage this year, State's starting to get around zone coverage a lot better, and that was shown against Texas A&M, who mixed in zone and man, but was still zone heavy. Will Rogers is performing, at least looking at the statistics, just as good. I mean, at least up there with some of the better quarterbacks in the country this year. Obviously, Mississippi State's had a few too many mistakes. A struggling red zone offense, some fumbles against Memphis and LSU, and then a massive interception in the first quarter against LSU, which was really Will Rogers' only true glaring mistake this year, other than a pick 6 against Louisiana Tech in a game that State ended up winning. So Will Rogers is improving significantly week by week. You can see it, you don't have to be a football savant to understand that Will Rogers is improving every single week. And that's something that is absolutely huge for Mississippi State as they get more and more used to this air raid offense, something that before Mike Leach got there, they weren't even running anything close to that.
We would appreciate if you would hit that like button, share these videos out on social media. You enjoy them, others will as well. And subscribe right here at the Voice of College Football. We got Daniel Black on the line. You can catch his work at MSUBulldogBlitz.com. Mississippi State taking on Alabama, the Tide, number 5 in the country after falling to Texas A&M, and Mississippi State at a bye week to prepare for Alabama. You went over a number of traits of Will Rogers improving and signs that he's improving and developing as a quarterback. I think it's also impressive now that we're a year and a half into the Mike Leach experiment in the SEC that people questioned, that he comes out the first game of last year, puts up the kind of numbers that you would expect from a Mike Leach offense. He's met with adversity. The offense can't perform. He actually relies more on the run than at any point in his career, I believe. Defense, they finished strong. They don't have the kind of season that they wanted, but it was a strange year, obviously, for everyone. But they finished strong. They turn around this year. And, man, they are so close to having an undefeated record. But, as of their last effort, they go to Texas A&M, very difficult place to play. And he's back to getting his swag back when it comes to the passing game and putting up those kind of numbers that we're accustomed to from a Mike Leach offense. So Mike Leach has certainly found his place at Mississippi State, it appears.
I think so. And the thing is, I still think it's actually a work in progress. I don't think it's quite finished just yet. If it were completely polished, Mississippi State would be 5-0 right now. We talked before the LSU game, and you asked me what are some things that Mississippi State has to do in order to beat LSU, and it's the exact same answer I would give to what are the things that Mississippi State has to do to beat anyone, and that is they have to play mistake free. They have to play a clean game. I alluded to the fact that against Memphis and LSU, Mississippi State lost because of turnovers. The first possession of the game against Memphis, Mississippi State fumbled that the Tigers recovered and ultimately returned for a touchdown. So State was down 7-0 right out of the get-go. Against LSU, Mississippi State is moving the ball into LSU territory in their first possession, and they fumble, and LSU returns it to about the State 20-yard line and ultimately score. The third possession, State's third possession of the game against LSU, they were in the red zone, and throw an interception. So these mistakes are ultimately what is costing Mississippi State. In the 2 games in which Mississippi State has committed 0 turnovers, NC State and Texas A&M. NC State is a team that beat Clemson. Texas A&M is a team that beat Alabama. Mississippi State beat both of those teams. Mississippi State is capable of competing with a lot of teams if they stay mistake-free. And, Mississippi State's only gotten within single digits of Alabama twice in the last 13 years. So, it's a tall task regardless of what happens in a game for Mississippi State to be competitive with Alabama. But Mississippi State has to do the exact same things against Alabama that they would do against anyone else. And that is they have to play clean football. They can't make any boneheaded mistakes. And we're starting to see that be the case. Texas A&M's proof of it. State committed 0 turnovers. Still left about 10 to 14 points left on the field. They had a couple of red zone opportunities. One was a missed field goal. The other penalties ultimately backed them up deep farther back in the field, and they ended up missing a field goal as well. So they left points on the field, even though they still won. That needs to be cleaned up. But you're right. Mississippi State and Mike Leach they're starting to come together. There's starting to be a bit of cohesiveness in the offensive unit. I think at this point, despite the fact State's not putting up any crazy number of points, I think it's pretty fair to say that the air raid can work in the SEC if you've been paying attention to these games. Because as I mentioned, State's 3-2 at a loss to Memphis and a pretty mediocre LSU team. So you may think, well, State's not that good. Well, you see what can happen when State plays mistake-free football. They can beat NC State. They can beat Texas A&M. So you're right. Mike Leach is still a work in progress. The offense is still improving, but it's definitely getting there.
I joked about Alabama coming to town mad, and that's conventional wisdom. Here's this big, bad, talented team, the gold standard of college football. They get knocked off. They're going to be motivated. They're going to be mad. I think there's truth to that. There should be truth to that with any team with pride and wanting to play with a chip on his shoulder. But at the same time, if teams have issues, they're not necessarily going to clear them up in a week. And Alabama did show vulnerabilities against the Texas A&M team that, again, was not playing that well prior to meeting Alabama. So I don't think there's any mistake about it that Alabama is a clear favorite here, and they should be, but they're not invincible. We know that. The Mississippi State defense, I know that you and others were high on the Bulldog defense coming into the season. How have you felt about the performance through these first 5 games?
They've met expectations. Last year, State came into the season, many people or at least who cover State and State fans and people who watch State really did not have high expectations for the State defense going into 2020. And despite the fact that State was roughly around 50 to 55 in total defense nationally, which is about average, it was actually above expectations. State's defense actually kept Mississippi State in a lot of games that they should not have been competitive in, such as Texas A&M and some others. This year, the defense is better. It has issues. It has vulnerabilities. But the thing is, when you run as a 3-3-5 like Zach Arnett does, there's always going to be those vulnerabilities, notably giving up big plays. When you put constant pressure on the quarterback like Mississippi State does, there's going to be opportunities downfield. What State has done well is they've been able to put enough pressure on the quarterback that the quarterback is forced to have a bad throw or have to throw it away or even get sacked. LSU is really the only team so far this year that was able to take advantage of those big plays. LSU scored 4 times, all of which on plays of 40 or more yards. So Mississippi State's 2 biggest weaknesses are giving up big plays, and even though they had a pretty solid defensive performance against Texas A&M, they didn't do a very good job tackling. Isaiah Spiller had a really good game, notably in the first quarter against State. And it's a State defense that, for the most part, has really been able to contain opponents' run games extremely well. That's part of the pressure of the 3-3-5 defense. So Mississippi State's defense has an opportunity to keep State in the game. I'm not expecting them to hold Alabama to under 30 yards or completely bottle them up because of the abilities of Alabama's offense and the talent that they have. But I think State's defense has an opportunity to make the game competitive as long as Mississippi State offensively, as I alluded to the last question, doesn't make any mistakes and give Alabama short field. So, to answer your question, to summarize it, yes, State's defense is performing up to expectations and is definitely the best unit on this team. They have their vulnerabilities, but they've been for the most part, they've done a good job disguising those vulnerabilities and getting around them.
I don't want to pretend that it's one of the more competitive series in the history of the SEC. It's very lopsided, as one might expect, but it also has provided some very interesting games throughout the years. I know that when I was there covering Mississippi State football, that the 1980 Mississippi State upset of Alabama was one that was brought up frequently. I witnessed one, actually. It was the night of the birth of my son when I was in Mississippi, and the Bulldogs upset a top 5 Alabama team in 1996. And then, of course, it was actually 2 years before that, there was a Alabama team that was ranked 1 or 2 in the country with Jay Barker at quarterback, and Mississippi State had him on the ropes until the last 20 or 30 seconds of the game before they pulled one out at Scott Field. And certainly Mississippi State gave Alabama a team that eventually would win a national championship in 2017 quite the run into the late in the fourth quarter before Calvin Ridley made some plays, and Bama pulled that one out. So I know that there are probably few, if any, 2 schools that are closer in proximity than these two. So it makes for an interesting rivalry there in the SEC.
It does. It's fascinating, the State-Alabama dichotomy, because in terms of, as you alluded to, in terms of program history and success, Alabama is on a completely different stratosphere than Mississippi State is. You are correct. Starkville and Tuscaloosa are closer than any other 2 schools in the Southeastern Conference. The series has not been very competitive since Nick Saban has gotten to Tuscaloosa. Nick Saban's first year at Alabama, Mississippi State beat him in 2007, 17-12, due in large part to a 100-yard pick six right before halftime that Anthony Johnson had. But since then, only twice has there been really any legitimate competition. That was 2014. You mentioned 2017. 2014 when State was number 1 and Alabama was number 5. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I might be Mr. Media person talking on here. I'm a State guy. I root for State. I'm not gonna lie. But I don't really have much of a hatred for Alabama, because personally, I think hating Alabama would be a miserable existence. If you hate Alabama, then you're just setting yourself up for failure. I congratulate those who do for this past week. I'm sure y'all are reveling in that glory, but I'm not one of those people who goes in talking trash about Alabama, because I know how usually that turns out. So I think that's the case with a lot of State fans. I think a lot of State fans, wins over Alabama and the Mississippi State-Bama rivalry are few and far between. So I think State fans understand that. I think for the most part, State fans are educated with that regard. So they don't have a huge hatred of Alabama, but I know plenty who definitely do not appreciate them in the Mississippi State fan base.
Just gave it a look. 83-18, the Alabama lead in the series that dates all the way back to, I thought I had it right here. That tie in Tuscaloosa, that 0-0 tie in 1896, it appears.
I'm sure those people in 1896 just loved that football game. 0-0,
There it is.
I would love to see college football Twitter today if Mississippi State and Alabama went to overtime at a 0-0 tie. I would just love to see how people react. Yeah.
If you can give us an overtime game, Daniel, on Saturday, that'd be phenomenal. All of college football nation would revel in that.
Sure. I'm pretty sure like the Texas A&M Alabama game was either the second most watched game in college football so far this season. If there's an overtime game, then I think a lot of people will be changing the channel across this nation of ours.
Yes. All right, Daniel. Well, enjoy the game. We appreciate you stopping by and breaking things down as always.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me.